your first experience with TTRPGs, as far as I know, was with D&D in 1979. Can you tell me more about it? Like, were you the DM or were you the player, and what was your class
Um,
as a player?
uh, it was uh, my neighbours got a copy of it, who I was quite good friends with, so they invited me over to play. I think my first character was an elf,
Hmm.
which in the in basic D&D was the whole thing. That was all species and class all mixed together. So I don't remember that much else. We were all 10, 11, 12, so it was just messing around and being silly more than anything else.
Did you get into the stories at that point yet, or like when did you start getting more deep into narrative? Especially because Monster of the Week is a very like it's a, for people that don't really know Monster of the Week, it's a lot more narrative than Dungeons and Dragons.
I think right away, like I think that's why the hobby appealed to me is that ability to kind of take your imagination and run with it for whatever sort of story you want to play. So
Mhm. Do you
yeah.
consider yourself like a writer or a artist outside of game design, or is it just like I like, or is it just like role playing something you like to do?
Um, uh, I can't really disentangle design from the rest of my playing of
Mhm.
role-playing games. Like I've been doing both so long that it's all kind of one thing. But I don't really have any other kind of artistic outlets
Mhm.
that I would consider myself super creative with.
I don't know if you're also I don't know if you're familiar with Stranger Things, but I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
thinking about this when I was just looking you up and getting more research on this. Stranger Things heavily romanticizes like D&D in the 1980s, and you were there actually playing
yeah.
D&D in the 1980s. I guess like my first question is, how does it feel to be ahead of the curve on that one?
I haven't really thought about that. Like it, the way they do it in Stranger Things feels very much to me like kind of nostalgic looking back more than anything else. I'm not sure it really relates too much to like what I was doing back then, if you see what I mean.
Mhm.
It's
Did you actually watch Stranger Things?
Yeah, I haven't caught up with the last series in a bit, I think, but
Mhm.
I've
I
watched most of it.
I
Yeah.
haven't watched any of it. I just know all the spoilers. I just like want to
Right.
know what like the differences are between like what you've seen from Stranger Things, but what versus what your actual experience was. Because like you're 11, 12, like that is the age of the characters essentially.
Oh man, it's a struggle to remember. I think like they've got very much a TV show set up for their games. Like they've got a big room for it and like lots of miniatures and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And I mean, back then when I was that age, we didn't have any of that stuff. We were just writing all over our school books and
Yeah.
bits of paper and it was much more whatever you could find to make do with. I mean, we were struggling to save pocket money to buy books, all that sort of thing. So, nothing for any extras.
I do remember like one big inaccuracy that people were harping on the show about was that um so obviously they roll the dice at some point, as you do when you play a tabletop role
Yeah,
playing game, but they'd roll it on like the battle map where there were a bunch of miniatures, which like is I can assume is super stressful. So you don't make sure that things like knock over, especially because like D&D is a war game. Um,
yeah.
speaking of
Then
just like
again, I think people always do that, even.
yeah, it's just like part of me is like, why would you like please like you have a dice tray if you have a dice tray. I have a dice tray, but
Yeah,
like you do it, you have it
yeah,
for a reason. Please, like we have a setup here. The big bad's over here. We gotta stay 6 feet away.
yeah, yeah.
I wanna look into your influence in other games other than D&D because it seems like your
Yep,
influ obviously, for people that don't know, Monster of the Week is powered by the apocalypse, and powered by the
yep,
apocalypse is basically it takes pages out of the book of Apocalypse World, and Apocalypse World isn't even the only other game that you mention in the book. I remember when I was reading about the Keeper originally, you took that, I believe, from Call of Cthulhu, but you just like
yep.
changed like the rest of the words after Keeper to
Yeah, yeah.
describe like the GM. When did you decide that it was time to move on from D&D and play other games?
Oh, almost immediately. I started exploring other games quite early on. I picked up Traveller, which is the old science fiction game,
Hmm.
kind of riffing off like 60s and 70s science fiction stuff, like Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke. So that was also came out in the 70s, and that was an early one I got. There was a old pulp action game called Mercenaries, Spies, and Private Eyes
Hmm.
that I played quite early on, and the old James Bond game that came out in the 1980s as well. So there's quite a few of those other early games that I tried out.
Which one stood out to you as a kid?
Traveller I really enjoyed and still do, although I've kind of it's one of those ones where I don't have any time for the Traveller rules anymore, but I still quite like aspects of the setting and that they've come up with over the years. Uh, Other ones that stood out, RuneQuest, I played first about 1992 or so, and that one's one I keep coming back to.
Hmm.
It's another kind of fantasy one with a really super developed world that the author of the game like was constantly adding to throughout his life. So it's got tons and tons of flavor when you play that. And there's a new edition of that out at the moment, which is really, really good. So it's one I'm probably planning to play again soon.
Hmm. I guess like I as much as I love D&D, I am a very anti you should only play D&D sort of person. And I guess like I want to see your thoughts on this. Like what is the value in branching out from D&D? Like what is the best parts of it?
Well, it's D&D provides you one sort of game, right? But there's so many other sorts out there. So there's tons of value in trying what else is available because the hobby has hundreds and hundreds of different games that cover all sorts of different topics. And I think kind of limiting yourself to one is like cutting off quite a lot of the options. It's like
Yeah.
if you didn't go to any movies except Marvel movies.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
It's, I mean, you know, they can be great, but there are so many other options. And particularly if you want to go for like really different things, like one of the best experiences I had recently was the game Dialect, which is it's a little game. There's no GM. Everyone's takes
Right.
an equal part, and what it's about is you're members of an isolated community that, and as you play, you develop your own language that the people in that community speak, like special words for different things, and you tell the story of how the community develops and then becomes pulled back into the world and loses its isolation. And it was absolutely mind blowing to play and like build this story of it was ours was like a weird hippie commune that was isolated off in the woods. And like what happened to the people there and the strange language they invented about their beliefs. And you know, that's nothing at all like Dungeons and Dragons, but
Yeah.
it's still a really cool role playing experience. And I kind of picked that because it's a really different example, but there's such a range of things in between. Um, uh, I'm trying to think what else I've played recently that's been really cool. Um,
What are your favorite like more recent RPGs, I guess?
um, the Alien RPG from Free League
Ooh,
is
yeah.
really great fun.
Hmm.
Um, I've run one scenario for that for some of my friends and played another game at a convention, and both were a blast. I've really been enjoying Vincent Baker's little zine game
Yeah.
series, the Wizard's Grimoire,
Hmm.
um, which they flip around the player and game master roles. So the person with the game book and the rules knowledge is the player, and you invite two people along to be your volunteers, he calls them, who essentially like make up the world in response to your
Hmm.
questions. So that's really good fun. And there's the first one, you're a wizard trying to understand the secrets of a spell book, and there's a series of other ones with different characters in that world, which they're really cool too. Um, what else? Oh, the new edition of RuneQuest that I
Oh,
mentioned.
yeah. I've seen that one
Yeah,
around.
yeah, very cool.
I'm also like you've mentioned games that like either flip the script of game mastering or don't even have a game master at all. And for some
Yeah.
people, that's completely new, especially if you only know about tabletop role playing games through Stranger Things. And like, what's the experience there when there's like no one captaining the ship?
It depends a bit on the game. Like there are kind of different takes on it. But often, like you don't miss it in a lot of these games that set up for it well. Um, you can have just as much creativity without someone filling in that detail. And a lot of games kind of provide you with a world instead. So I'm thinking here of something like Fiasco,
Mhm.
which is kind of like the Coen brothers film game. And that one, how it works is when you start playing, you pick a setting. Um, I think there's one that's like set at a wedding. There's ones that are set at employees at a big mall.
Mhm.
Something like that. It's just like a setting with some quirky elements. And with the second edition of that, you've basically got a deck of cards with items that would turn up in that setting. And you kind of select some of those that provide you with what your characters are and what's going on. And that gives you quite a lot to work with to play without having to have someone saying, here's where you are and here's what's going
Right.
on. So essentially, in that one, each person will end up like game mastering one scene here and there, and you'll take turns at it,
Mhm.
which is one quite good way to go. Um, that game dialect works pretty similarly. You each take turns. You'll draw a card which will tell you like a new word or a new concept you've got to create a word for, and then you describe a scene in which that word is. You've got to use it in the new
Right.
way, which is kind of how you build up the vocabulary. So that was pretty neat. And then another one I played recently is Ironsworn, which is another Powered by the
Yes.
Apocalypse game.
I've heard of that one as well.
Yeah, and that's built for solo and co-op play. And how it does it is it's got like for when something happens that a game master would usually suggest or answer what happens. It's got a bunch of tables you can roll on and ideas for how to think about it. And I found playing that cooperatively with one other person, it very quickly became very natural for us to say, "Oh, this happened. So what happens next?" And like it quickly became just as easy as if there was a game master there telling you. So yeah, overall, I'd say having a game master or a dungeon master is just not as important as you think. And there are plenty of games that allow you to do either a different thing with what the different roles in the game are, or get rid of some of them entirely.
Right. I want to talk more
Mm,
about game design because I
sure.
am a person that's always the keeper, never the hunter. And I kind of live by the keeper guideline whenever I run a game. Like
Yeah.
I've played like when I'm dungeon mastering for Dungeons and Dragons, I will use literally like the keeper guide, even if it doesn't apply.
Mm,
I've been picking
yeah.
up the game City of Mist, another kind of powered by the apocalypse game. I use that as my guide. And I think it's just literally so genius. And I want to know like what your thought process was when like creating these steps to a mystery.
Um, I really, for that in particular, I just kind of broke down like what happens in an episode of Supernatural or an episode of Buffy or the X Files. I watched a lot of them, and I was going, how are they structured? Like, what events do you get? Like, how much stuff is going to happen, and all that sort of thing. So it was kind of trying to reduce all of that down to something that was nice and easy to work through.
Mhm.
Because the other thing that was my main objective in that mystery preparation section is to make it really quick. At least if you want to do it quickly, it's possible. I know some people like to put a ton of work in, which is fine as well, but I kind of, for my life at the time when I was writing it, which was super busy, um, I wanted to be able to go, okay, I can sit down for 15 minutes before the game and figure out the mystery.
Yeah. I want to know from the conception of Monster of the Week how long it took since the conception of Monster of the Week for you to actually play the game as a hunter and not be the game master? Like, how long did it?
Ooh.
I'm just curious about that.
Um, I think it was in the final steps of playtesting, which
Hmm.
would have been about 2010, 2011. I think I've been
Okay.
writing it. I probably started 2007, 2008,
Hmm. So that
somewhere
means
around then.
3 years before you actually like played the game as like a player.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as a designer, like it's very easy to get people to playtest a game if you say,
Hmm.
"Here, I've got this game to try out. Will you play it?" And I'll organize everything else. It's quite a bit harder to give the rules to another person, say, "Figure this out,"
Yeah.
and make and create a game for everyone else. So it's certainly like a big ask to do that. So quite hard to do, especially when you're kind of getting started.
Especially because with Monster of the Week, it's like all mystery based, so you have to like basically you're writing the ending for all the players to figure out. Yeah. What drew your eye to supernatural like action and mystery?
um, it was because I was really enjoying Supernatural when it was showing,
Hmm.
and there weren't really any role playing games that seemed to capture that sort of style exactly.
Yeah.
Like, there's always been a few games about monster hunters and investigators, but that kind of actiony kind of focused TV series drama
Right.
combo just didn't really seem to be out there, and I really wanted to kind of play in that sort of style. So
Yeah, because in
I
Monster of the
figure
Week,
I have to make it myself.
yeah. Because Monster of the Week, like you're trying to like you can kill the monster and you probably should, but in Call of Cthulhu, like if you're fighting the
Yeah,
monster, you're gonna die. Yeah.
yeah. And Call of Cthulhu's also got that whole thing about the your kind of personality generating in contact with the horrors and things, which I
Hmm.
also didn't think's really appropriate for a more actiony sort of thing.
Yeah. Especially when I think
Um,
about like the keeper principles that you put in mind, like make them look awesome, be a fan of the
yeah,
hunters. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, it's not really the same kind of insignificant humans versus vast horrors. It's
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. And I
yeah.
guess not to make you pick like a favorite child, but what's your favorite playbook that you've ever made?
Oh, that is the Searcher, I think.
Oh, that was a
Yeah.
really quick. Why the searcher?
Um, because it is my favorite. I've thought about it, but it's the one that I kind of like both the concept of it and the way it worked out. And I think if I was to play a game today, I'd sit down and play one of those and be
Hmm.
this kind of questing for truth sort of character
Hmm.
more than a magic-y sort of person or a fighter.
Right. Yeah. Can you talk about like your inspiration for the searcher? Like, because I know that there's in the original book, there's like a mediography of things you were
Yeah.
inspired by. What was the searcher inspired by?
Um, Mostly kind of the side of Fox Mulder that isn't captured by the professional.
Yeah.
So, like the professional's like the FBI agent
Mhm.
searching for monsters, but yeah, his whole side of just wanting to know what's really going on is the main thing behind the searcher.
What's your favorite mystery on that? On the other hand, what's your favorite mystery that you ever written?
Oh, that I've written. I can't bring one to mind actually. It's been quite a while since I've played Monster of the Week, so
Mhm.
that it's not really focused. I can pull one my favorite from the Tome of Mysteries though,
That's fine. Yeah.
which is not written by me, but I really enjoy it. It's the is it mini movie Monster Madness. I always
Yes.
really enjoy that one.
Yeah. No, I'm familiar with that one.
Yeah.
Speaking of the expansion books, the second one, I don't think the release date is technically out, but we do know that the Codex of World that's coming out soon.
Yep.
And we just mentioned the Tome of Mysteries. And I guess my question, maybe we've already answered this, but what rules or playbooks or mysteries did you add in these two books that you wish that you added much earlier, maybe in the first edition?
Um, I would like. I always, when I came up with the phenomenon mysteries idea, I would have liked that to be in the original, so you could deal with like weird problems instead of just fighting monsters.
Mhm.
That's probably the big one.
Can you, I
Uh,
guess you don't have to, but I do wonder, can you tease anything about the Codex of Worlds, like anything you're particularly excited about?
yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. I don't want to get too much into
Of course.
specifics because
Yeah.
of where we are, but so one big chunk of it is the team playbooks, which are inspired by Blades in the Dark, and they
Right.
give your Monster Hunter group like a little story and its own playbook that can develop and gain improvements. So they're really fun. I think everyone will enjoy seeing those, and they there's quite a range of them. So you can there's some quite traditional things like supernatural style on the road in your cars, kind
Mhm.
of cruising around, to things like being a rock band who fights monsters,
Yeah.
or what would be another good one to mention? I think that yeah, I think you could see, but between those, there's quite a lot, and there are a lot of different options, and I think people will enjoy exploring those.
We've been mentioning like quite a few games, and as someone that wants to tip their toe into game design, but is kind of not sure how, like, do you ever get afraid that you're just copying too much from other games? Because it feels like there's nothing original anymore. Like it feels like everything's just a copy of something else. So how do you feel that the thing that you're making is original, and when do you think that you've gotten there?
Um, I don't necessarily think that it has to be original.
Hmm.
Like, I think a lot of game design happens in taking ideas or inspiration for other people and putting your own spin on them. So, um, like that synthesis of the work you do to create something new, even if it's got lots of inspirations from other places, is still a great deal of value. And I think looking at something like the Powered by the Apocalypse games, I think is a good kind of way to think about that, because starting from Baker's Apocalypse World, there's got lots and lots of games developed from it, and each of them's doing its own thing, and doing different things, even though they've got that kind of core inspiration the same. And I don't think that means anything the worse for designers working that way. And particularly, there's also a lot of games that encourage this. I mean, there are plenty of games that have got kind of Creative Commons licenses and SRDs that are there to encourage you to take
Hmm.
what's there and do your own thing with it. And I think that there's a lot of value in that. Um, the idea that um, everything you do has to be super original. I don't think it's really true. It's there's a lot to be said for riffing off something else and creating your new spin on it, or a completely new thing that's still kind of inspired by it somehow.
Yeah. And I guess like speaking of riffing off, like you've been kind of in the role play scene for like decades. I want to guess like pick your brain on what is some of the biggest things you've learned about role playing with others. I guess like either how to do it or like if you've learned any life lessons from it.
I would say the biggest one for me is that, like, when you sit down to play a role playing game with a group of people, um, you're all in it together equally, right? It doesn't, like, maybe one person's hosting the game at their house or on their Discord or whatever. So
Right.
they've kind of got a special relationship there. Maybe someone else is running the game or moderating it or facilitating it or brought along the rule books. But even though there's some little differences like that, everyone's there to enjoy themselves and have fun and contribute to the story you're telling. So I think always remember that, you're all there contributing equally. Respect the people around you, listen to what they are doing, build off their ideas, and expect them to do the same. And that everyone should be there having a blast. That includes if you're the game master or the dungeon master, you are also there to have fun. So yeah, don't keep that in mind. Don't let it be a drag, right?
Yeah. I want to thank you once again for joining me. I guess like on the extra live stream or just like doing this interview with me because I like as I said like I love Monster of the Week. It's like a game that's really important to me. But I do
Yep.
have one final question for you, and that's if
Cool.
you're a classic monster, which monster would you be?
Oh man. As an old goth, I think I'd probably be some kind of vampire or ghost.
Ooh, those are good ones. Those are good ones.
Yeah, maybe a vampire like Tom Hiddleston's character in Only Lovers Left Alive.
Mhm. Yes.
If I can pretend that I could be as handsome as Hiddleston. But